Welcome back to Hidden Edge Poker. Today I'm joined by fellow Run It Once colleague and coach Alex, who is also a licensed psychotherapist, and we will explore the gap between knowledge and execution in poker, because in general a lot of hands of course are interesting from a technical perspective, but there might be also something more that simple digging into solver and strategy cannot fix.
Yeah, I completely agree. Hi everyone, I'm Alex. As Francesco said, I'm a poker mindset coach, a licensed psychotherapist, and I guess you're quite familiar with the fact that a lot of times when we play poker, we know what we are supposed to do, but for some reason we're just not doing it. So today we're gonna look at some hands, and I'm gonna try to give my point of view on what might be happening mentally. Of course, like if you're a mindset coach, you're not a magician and you don't read people's minds. So to get a correct grasp of what's going on, I'll have to talk with the student and explore with them. So for today, I'm just gonna give some possible interpretations. And also, I'm going to try to give some quick solutions on how you can work on certain kinds of leaks that we might see in these hands. So, yeah, that's what it's going to be about.
So, let's actually put this method into practice and start with the first hand, where we have a bunch of hands played by one of my students. And we will have other hands that I played or that other people played. So in this hand, this hand has been played at 500 NL. My student is from the cutoff with pocket nines and says that a completely unknown reg opens from under the gun. So we are playing in complete absence of information. The student 3 bets and faces a 4 bet. So here we already have the first decision node. This hand pre-flop is indifferent against the 4 bet, and in general you can, if you have no information, of course you can proceed by randomizing. If you know more about your opponent's strategy, you can lean more towards one side or the other of the spectrum. In this case, Hero decides to call. The flop is 5-6 deuce 2 tones, and the opponent decides to bet for a quarter pot bet. This is not the most accurate sizing for this kind of board texture, and but here we cannot do much else but just call our hand. The turn is a 3, and here something interesting happens. So under the gun checks, and Hero decides to bet 1/5 of the pot, which I think it's a very good strategy. In general, here the out of position player is going to give a lot of information because, first of all, I think the small bet on the flop makes it kind of awkward here to play over pairs, because you have an SPR which is a bit too large to jam. So it can be awkward, to bet something intermediate and have a lot of awkward rivers which make it complicated, which you would avoid if you bet a bit larger on the flop. So one very common line that you can see here by a player who is not super, like if I see small bet on the flop, I think this player is not very well studied, let's say. A very common line you might see is that they might take their value like this with the idea that you're gonna stab a lot, and of course they just close the action on the turn without having to massively overbet, because now the raise is smaller than pot size, and of course it's pretty comfortable for them to jam over pairs. As you can see, this is what Wizards idea of the race would be. So there are some hands which are kind of not very intuitive to find, especially if a person hasn't studied the spot. And there is a lot of slow play, for example, with pocket aces, even without the hearts. But you see this ace queen being the preferred line, because the idea is that they want to block pocket queens. Against an equilibrium range, pocket nines is almost close to pure fold. But again, our hero in this case decides to call and sees the bad news losing to pocket aces.
What a surprise. Yeah, so, well, what are your thoughts on this hand? What do you know about the student?
So, in general, and we will see it also with two more hands that we have played by him, it kind of tends to make big decisions on the turn. So, what I would feel is that sometimes he recognizes the idea technically, but there's some sort of mental thing that sorts of make him feel committed if he starts to play for a big pot. So if he calls the turn, is more willing to make big hero calls even without evaluating the run out. Or sometimes you might, spoiler alert, you might see him making big folds on the turn because he doesn't want to face difficult decisions on the river. So he's looking for a sort of way to simplifying the spots, but it usually ends up, I mean, not all the time, of course, but in a few occasions, like the hands that we will see today, it ends up backfiring in one direction or the other. And again, while we can discuss technically some aspects, I think there's something that goes beyond the purely technical aspect there.
Yeah, because as you say, technically, I think it's very likely this student probably has access to, in his head, to the fact that, like, this is a pretty, like, super tight range spot. And as you said, the bluffs are very unintuitive. So if this hand is already indifferent in theory, of course, in practice, it's very likely it's going to be a losing call. But it seems like during the hand, he's not really thinking like that. And he's more... So if we would look at this from a classical CBT perspective, so cognitive behavioral therapy, their model is, they say, there is a trigger, and that kind of leads to a thought, that thought leads to an emotion, and that emotion leads to behavior. Now, when the behavior is problematic or not really acting in your favor, like maybe getting the stack in here with nines, that probably means there's some irrational thought in there, and we can work at the level of that thought. So maybe something that's happening in this particular hand is that he sees a low board, he sees a check shove on the turn, and he's like, I already put so much money into the pot. He might be like, well, if I fold this, he's gonna take advantage of me. And then maybe, so if that's the thought, maybe the feeling that comes up is fear, like fear of being outplayed. And then the behavior is like, I'm just gonna get it in then. So I'm not gonna... He acts out of fear of not being outplayed, and basically he just puts the money in. So this is, one theory of what could be happening. And I think if you struggle with that, of course, it's like that story or another kind of story. I think what's worth doing is taking some time to also review your hands from a mindset perspective. So if you see you're doing mistakes that keep repeating and, it's not technical leaks. So I'm not sure, Francesco, if you have any kind of mistakes that you do consistently, and it's not because you don't know the theory.
Yeah, I mean, it actually happens. Fortunately, less than in the past, because I've been working on that. But I also selected one of my hand where, for me, it would be more like I am too self-critical, I would say, to a point where it starts to become a negative thing, and so this kind of has an impact also on my focus on the session at hand. Mm-hmm. So I would say my mistakes end up being more in this overly self-critical pole, and also what I was thinking from what you were saying, do you think that in this specific case the brain can sort of shut down and ignore any range consideration and just think in primal poker terms? By primal, I mean more of a person that just started approaching poker, and say does he have it or not, a sort of approach, or it's more just a sort of frustration call that is like, whatever, I already put a bunch of my stack in, I don't want to fold. What would you think it's more?
I think it's definitely both, because when you have generally, mindset and body kind of work together. And we're going to talk a bit more in the next sense about what's happening when we are under stress and what's happening like physiologically and why we are actually reacting worse because our brain doesn't really give us access to our information anymore. And there's stuff you can do in that area, but if we just talk about the psychological side of what's happening here, I think what's very useful to do is to note down these stories that keep repeating in your head. So for you, it would be, just moments when you are very self-critical. Maybe for this student, it would be moments when that story comes up and he's like, I'm not going to let him push me away. And if you see these things repeating, maybe after the session, take 5-10 minutes, pick up these hands and write down, what was your thought process in the hand, and what do you think your thought process should be now that you're analyzing this hand cold? Because the more you practice it, the quicker you're gonna be to realize in game, oh, that story that he's pushing me out of the pot again, that story comes up, and then you won't have to tie your action to the emotion and the behavior. You can just interrupt the chain somehow. For me, that would have been, a lot of times I struggled with being a calling station, and the same, I was like, I can't fold here and the more I practice noticing that I can't fold here story, the quicker I caught myself doing it and not, taking that action.
And we will again keep investigating the students' game plan in the following ends. Actually, I think we can just see them because at least this end from a technical point of view, there's not really much to say, but the technical discussion becomes more interesting on the third end that we will see. So here it's a 3-bet pot, small blind versus button. Small blind is a solid reg of 500 NL. It goes for a 30% range bet here, and hero calls. Turn is a 4. Small blind bets again with the 2/3 pot. This hand is a pure call, as you can also see by this wizard snapshot here. And my student, what is interesting I think about this hand is that my student sent me this hand and said these exact words: I know it's a call on the turn, but I decided to fold because I don't know how often, because this hand is supposed to be a bluff catcher on some runouts. It can do some funny things on other runouts. And my student was like, I don't know, he was worried mostly about the bluff catching line, so he didn't consider the aggressive line, which is also maybe a point worth noting, that it's possible that he can turn his hand into a bluff on some runouts. But his idea was basically that he never gets to realize his showdown because he doesn't know if the opponent triple barrels enough and for him to be able to have a profitable bluff catch, or if he's going to give up very often. So he decided to make his life easier by just folding the turn. But as you can see, this is a 2.5 big blind mistake. So it's a quite expensive mistake considering the dynamic is kind of frequent there. And again, showing the final hand of this student, where there is this one was played at 200 NL, a reg, I would say tight aggressive reg, opens from MP, he 3-bets king queen suited, face a 4-bet and calls. Flop ace king 4 rainbow, we face a quarter pot bet call. And on the turn, the reg decides to barrel again with a quarter pot. This can be also, some players might even go sort of range on 2 streets, especially if they slightly under 4-bet pre-flop. This is the default strategy of Wizard, but some players will not find, for example, these 4-bets, especially tighter players. So if you don't have these pocket 9s through 7s, this low-suited connector, and your range is heavily skewed towards big pairs, big aces, and broadways, you can also consider this double barrel with the idea that you're playing for equity realization. But what's surprising is that the student folds here, and this is a very serious theoretical mistake. Again, his idea is that he doesn't think the other player is bluffing enough, and he doesn't think he can realize enough equity. But you can see that this is specifically as diamonds, and it's a 6 big blind mistake, which is huge right now. So it's a pretty big fold to make, and I think against no assumption you can consider folding against a small bet. Again, his idea is that he cannot call a triple barrel on the river, which is true, but you get a price which is so good. And also, if your opponent is, again, doing bet with the range, there's gonna be some hands that give up, and you get actually to showdown sometimes. It's sometimes also you improve to a 10, even if you think you don't have enough implied odds, still you get to realize some of your equity. Or, for example, you still have a little bit of equity with trips against ace queen, ace jack suited type of hand. So it's not you're drawing completely dead there. So what are your thoughts about this combo of two hands?
So I think, first of all, it's interesting that here he falls to a quarter pot bet, and he's like, I don't think it's bluffed enough. But in the previous hand where, he's under the gun versus he's cut off against under the gun 4-bet pot against the check shove on the turn, he's like, I guess there's enough bluffs here. So, I was saying previously how we can also talk about the physiological side of the coin. Because it seems to me like what's happening here is some kind of classical stress response, in the sense that, he's, especially from what you're also telling me, it seems like, he has this aversion to being uncomfortable on the river, and he knows like he's either gonna get pot committed and put too much money into the pot with hands that he shouldn't. So he gets into some situations, and that's the fight response, like, I'm just going to get the money in, that's it. Or then there's the flight response, which is this, I don't want to put myself in an uncomfortable situation where I don't know what to do on the river, so I'm just going to fold here. And this is something that I see very often with my students as well. So if we view it from this side, of course, we can. What's going on physiologically is that the side of your brain that is responsible with doing these poker decisions, and that's responsible with your working memory, meaning, all the factors that are happening in the here and now, and you should take into account, like ranges, pot odds, future streets, stuff like that. Your prefrontal cortex handles that, and when you're in a situation that stresses you, so your body releases cortisol. That cortisol kind of impairs your prefrontal cortex. So it's gonna work worse, and that means you're not gonna have access to all your poker knowledge, and you're probably gonna do mistakes. And instead of having, the thought process of what's his range here, what are my odds, is he gonna find enough bluffs, so on and so forth, you're just going like, I guess I call, something like that, I guess we're all familiar with it. And as I said previously, there's the option to work with that at the psychological level and see, what is that discomfort on the river telling you, like how you can rephrase those thoughts so they are rational and work well for you instead of sabotaging you. Or at the physiological level, there are a lot of techniques that are specifically used to reduce stress. There are like breathing techniques, there is meditation, and although my personal opinion is that in the psychology world that's kind of overused right now, in the sense that, I don't know, it sometimes feels like everyone says, just meditate and all your problems are gonna be gone. That is not true, but like this particular side with like stress responses is where breathing and meditation can actually work. So if you're struggling with these, I think it's really worth giving that a try.
As a fellow meditation practitioner, I can vouch for this advice, and I agree that in general meditation is sold as a quick fix, but there are actually a lot of benefits of the practice. But again, you cannot expect miracles. It's just important to understand the activity for what it is, and for the benefits it can give you. And talking about this hand, one thing that came up to mind, do you think that there might also be a problem, because I saw this also both in students, opponents, and even with this was something when you were talking about what did you work on your mental game in the past. This was a problem that I had and that I worked on, is that I found in the past hard to switch gear in between a hand. And I think this might be also what's happening here. Like, what do I mean by switching gear is that, for example, I'm planning a bluff from the flop, like I go check raise, bet turn, and I have a hand which is supposed to bluff on like 80% of rivers, but I get this 20% of rivers where, you know, you're supposed to shut down and you're like, whatever, I can never win at showdown. I was planning to bluff anyway. And basically you're unable to make this mental switch that allows you to say, wait a minute, the range here is like this run out is bad for me to keep bluffing with this hand, so I have to give up. And this can be, of course, for calling. For example, you plan to bluff catch, but you get a bad run out and decide to bluff catch anyway because you were into that line of thought. Or for a value bet, like especially 3-bet pot out of position, it's more likely, of course, because in position, when in doubt, you check. Out of position, if you check, you're like, I don't know, I cannot really check call, but so I think I'm still ahead of some hands, therefore I bet. And I think how I would frame it is like switching gear. I don't know if you have more technical terms, or and also if you think it can be the case also in this frame.
Yes, I think it can definitely be the case. So the skill of switching gear in psychology, I guess that would be cognitive flexibility. And in poker, a very common term I hear it's being used about this whole thing is getting attached to your hand. Mm-hmm. So I think what's happening there psychologically is not only you get attached to your hand, but you get attached to your initial thought process. So maybe here he might be thinking, oh, ace king 4 flop, well, it's very good for him, so I'll probably have to call once and fold. And then when he sees the jack, well, the decision is already made in a way, and he's just going with it because he gets attached to his thought process, and there's maybe a lack of cognitive flexibility there. And as I said before, if you're under stress, cognitive flexibility, so the ability of, maybe rephrasing your thought and recognizing, okay, the situation has just changed, so I have to change my thought process now because he bet so small on the turn or something like that. That goes down under stress. But it's also a skill that can definitely be trained. And the first step to train it is to raise awareness of your thoughts. And of course, meditation is one of them. Working on your mindset alone or with a coach is another one of them, where you can practice seeing your blind spots and seeing the story that's running in your head much earlier before it ruins your game.
And let's move on. This end, we will analyze the opponent's play. So Hero, this hand has been played at 200 NL between two regulars that also play higher stakes. So we have a small blind going for a small overbet here, which is a common strategy on ace Broadway two tones, but in general it happens on boards where you have the offsuited the two pair advantage in general. So ace king X, ace queen X, because you expect the big blind to always 3-bet. So here it's more common to see some a smaller bet, high frequency strategy. So already this is interesting. I mean, it's of course a viable strategy, but I think it's kind of sketchy and probably shows that the small blind is playing a bit of a very greedy strategy, perhaps expecting big blind to overcommit money into the pot with the medium strength hand and put 2 money into the pot with high equity hands such as flush draws. But anyway, nothing else for Hero to do but just call here. And we have 4 of hearts turn, so here we can expect a lot of the betting range to continue, but also some checks, because there are some hands in the C betting range that absolutely want to give up and check fold. And we see a check. So here Hero just has a pure bet, And here, considering that you're up against a super polarized range, so we are not up against pocket jacks, jack 10 type of hands, which we can really annoy when we start to bet pot or bigger. Basically, we will be up against either some top pair hands, some draws, or some check fold. So here you can use some intermediate bet size. This would be different if small blind were to see bet quarter pot. In that case, you want to size up because again, they can have a ton of second pair type hands and all medium strength hands that really hate to see a big bet. But here, again, when you're up against either medium strong or nothing, it's better to just stick to something intermediate. Perhaps you can even bet a bit smaller. But I think, I mean, 2/3, I guess it's okay. I wouldn't go pot though. And surprisingly, we see a shove. So this can be a play because even if it's a massive overbet of almost 2x pot raise, but it can be a play because there is a super wet board with a lot of texture changing cards. And I would say the bottom of the value range we expect would be something like ace 10, ace 10, a set. Those would be the hands that would fit there. And Hero has a tough decision already because basically you are beating pocket, you are blocking pocket fours of with the 4 of clubs that can take this line. But ace 4 essentially is not supposed to beat any value, so it's purely a bluff catcher. Of course, we can expect something, maybe something like 5-4 of club. Actually, it's very hard line to balance, I think. So it's also hard to assess how the opponent might think here. But in general, it's probably I would say value-driven play. But here, I remember I played this hand. I remember thinking in game, maybe my opponent can play ace-king without a club or heart this way. So this made me lean towards calling. You can see that ace-king is not a shove. It would be just a bit too much. And you can see that basically the threshold hand would be ace-10. And there are some combo draws that take this line. I don't know why some queen 10 of clubs also takes this line, some queen 3 suited, and solver finds ace 8 for some weird reason. But you can see it's not a very intuitive range for a human, so it doesn't make much sense to study the solver output here because it's more what my opponent is trying to get. And I think it's it can be more thin/protection oriented, especially if he thinks I'm stubbing too many draws and maybe too many medium strength aces. After a brief tank, I decided to call, and surprisingly, my opponent showed something in the line of ace king without a piece, but way thinner, because actually I can have ace jack in let's say here. So ace king I can understand wanting to value jam against ace jack, but ace jack looks extremely thin, and it's already a losing play in theory and might be even a massive blunder in practice. So what are your thoughts on this play?
Easy money. Yeah, so I think again, as always, there might be two things going on here. I think first of all, nice. You made a nice point about how, as in position, our stabbing range should look differently if he bets 1/3 on the flop compared to overbetting on the flop. So I like that point. And now about his play, I think of course it can just be that he has a leak. Maybe not technical leak, but more like exploitative thought process kind of leak, thinking that, I don't know, if I check jam here, he's just gonna put me on a bunch of flash draws, and he bet small on the turn, so maybe he has a lot of weaker ace-x, so let's just shove. So it can be that, like some kind of technical exploitative leak, or it can be, which I see more commonly, the fact that he just doesn't want to get to an uncomfortable decision on the river. And you know, some facets of this leak, I think they are so common. You know, people just I don't know, using a much bigger size and shoving turn when they know that they should bet small because they get to the river with a very uncomfortable SPR or stuff like that, where I don't know what to do on the river, so I'm just gonna check shove the turn. And I think what that signals is, again, the fear of being uncomfortable. So you kind of remove yourself from that situation in whatever way possible. And some kind of like something like this we've seen in the previous hands with Francesco's student, but also, and I mentioned how you can, if you have this kind of leak, you can act at the level of the thought, you can act at the physiological level where you just try to reduce your stress. But the other way to act on it is to act at the emotion level. So let's say you are uncomfortable and you recognize that and you try to remove yourself from the situation. So what about if we kind of invited some curiosity in? And what if we asked, oh, okay, I feel uncomfortable here. What is this discomfort trying to tell me? And instead of running away from it, if we listen to it, there's something missing there. And that discomfort is usually covering some kind of leak. So maybe, you're not that great at playing rivers in this spot. You don't know like how to make the best decisions, and you're afraid of making a mistake, so you'd rather not take a spot. But what about if we listened to that discomfort and be like, okay, maybe I don't know how to play these rivers that well. That's fine. Now I'm gonna remove myself from the situation, but because I've listened to this, what about after the session I'm gonna review a few of these spots or try to study how to be better in them? Because if you recognize avoidance, there's something that you can do about it. But if you're just avoidant and you remove yourself from the spot and that's it, you don't do anything about it, then it's probably gonna happen again and again, and it's not gonna have a good impact on your game.
Yeah, and what you said, I think it's related to the fact that this hand especially after you go for this awkward sizing on the flop, gets complex lines on the turn of either betting and then having to make some complex decision on a bunch of rivers, and also check calling, which again is like he's putting the ball in my camp, and basically if he faces a river jam, then he also has a sort of bluff catcher there, because it's a spot where he's sort of trying to simplify his life. Again, as you pointed out, we can see some common pattern also with the hands played by my student, but here we see it in a more, it takes an aggressive form, because he decided to just fast play it and basically pray for it in the end.
Yeah, and I think it's also like, this is not, as you said, it's not really the standard strategy. And I think, players who want to take like very fancy and, cool lines in a way kind of end up in these spots more often than they should. And then, they have to do something, like they get in a spot they don't exactly know how to handle. So I think, again, there is merit to look into, okay, why am I picking this strategy? Am I really handling it that well? Or it's very likely that it's going to get me into trouble. Because if you get yourself into trouble by using a strategy you're not really familiar with, then you might just better use the standard strategy and bet a quarter or a third or whatever here.
And if viewers are wondering how to handle opponents that are going for sort of offbeat kind of strategies, the answer is play solid until you have a specific read. That's why here my first instinct was, this is value heavy line, and I was considering even folding, because I was like, what hand weaker than ace 10 wants to do that? But then I also thought there is actually a possibility of overplay, more likely overplay than a bluff, and more likely overplay from a hand that is uncomfortable on runouts, while ace 10 is more comfortable as a bet, let's say, in a lot of situations. So this made me lean towards the call. Again, it's a theory proven call, but important if you face these lines to try to be solid until you know exactly. Like, of course, if you know your opponent is doing that, you can exploit it, but possibly also your opponent will realize that you've seen him doing that. And I mean, nowadays people tend to study a bit more, so it's a bit harder to see this error repeating, but shows a bit about his thought process. So we have next hand, I played at 2-5 against some unknown reg. We 3-bet king 9 suited from the small blind, and he calls from the button. We get a board which is pretty bad for our range. So here I'm playing with a big bet or check approach, and my hand basically plays as a check in this line. My idea is that if I bet, I want to close the action mostly into streets, and this hand is not strong enough to take this line, and plus it doesn't have good blockers as well to take this line, and a lot of turns, like you don't want to bloat the pot spontaneously from the flop, let's say. So I check, my opponent bets small, which is a play that he's supposed to do very, very often, considering how good this texture is for his range. And here we just call. Turn is very good for my hand because it decreases the possibility of him having a set, but and also it's not an awkward run out that completes a straight or a flush, of course. So we check again, and he checks back, and here we can already identify a little bit his range. It's possible that he has some 8x type of hand that doesn't want to bloat the pot much more. He can have pocket 6s, pocket 7s, pocket 4s, like lower pairs, or he can have some ace-high hands, or he can have some flush draw hands that decided to realize some equity, some jack-10 hand as well that might want to realize a little bit of equity, because on this turn we can start to have some check shoves with our slow plays. And also it's possible that he might slow play with pocket 9 specifically, and even with maybe with pocket 8s, but I would say more pocket 9s, considering we have more 9x combos than 8x combos. So pocket 9s is blocking a little bit more of our check call downs for stacks. Like for example, this hand is a hand that I can play as a check call, check call, check call. But anyway, he checks, and we get 4 of diamonds river. So here it's important to find a value bet with a small sizing, because again, we identified that a portion of his range can be this pocket 7s, 8x type of hand. So our hand still has a lot of equity against our opponent's range, but the opponent is not capped, first of all, because again, he can have slow plays, he can have he can river a flush, he can river a boat with pocket 4s also. So he's not capped. And in general, this hand is not worth more than this sizing when you want to value bet. Maybe you can make an argument for betting like 40%, but that already becomes a little bit closer, but definitely you cannot go for large bets. And what happens is surprising, because my opponent goes for 75% of the pot raise, leaving behind just a little bit of his stack left. So this is not a spot where I would expect pocket 10s or pocket jacks played that way. Like usually you can see in some spots some team value raises with this size, but here mostly my opponent is raising a flush or a slow played boat, or like it doesn't have overpair that wants to take this line. So here I'm expecting to just see an all-in raise. And my thought process in game was that specifically having the king, we are unblocking ace-jack, ace-queen with the diamond, which are the hands that might take this line. I'm also unblocking pocket 9s, but more that's more the technical part, which in the game when I made the decision was a bit overshadowed by the fact that my opponent didn't jam and made this weird raise. So I thought probably is assuming that he has roughly the same amount of fold equity, whether he jams or whether he goes for this size. And when I play against unknowns, I always assume that they're not strong players until they prove me otherwise. So I'm kind of leaning towards thinking he's sort of trying to make an accomplishing kind of play, like bluff he folds anyway, if I have value I jam, and I didn't even randomize, I just called pretty quickly and got showed one of these. You can see here that intermediate raise sizes are not really a thing, so it's mostly going to be a raise. And against some intermediate sizing, our hand would be a mix between mostly call or fold. This shove, I don't think makes much sense in practice because, again, this hand is not supposed to exist. But you can see the slow played was pocket nines and not pocket eights, again, because we have more 9x's than other combos. And a bunch of those hands with the queen mostly. And flush draws, of course. So, curious to hear your thoughts about this.
Okay, so yeah, this is quite an interesting hand, and once again, it might be, different stuff going on for him. So, it might be, a rational thought process. Like, if it's something like, I think I have the same fold equity if I raise this compared to raising bigger, then I'm not saying it's a correct thought process, but at least it is rational in the sense that, he has a reason to do that that's actually anchored in reality, and that's what he believes. And if that's true, then it could be a technical leak, and he might want to study that more and realize, okay, that actually wouldn't be the same fold equity. But on the other hand, it might just be the fear of bluffing your whole stack, which again, I think it's very common. A lot of people tell me, respond to my content that they feel like that's one of their biggest leaks in terms of mindset. And I think if that's what's going on, you should probably, so going back to what we said in the previous hands, that you can act at the level of the thought, or you can, try to reduce your stress. I think another way to do that is to just act at the level of the emotion, and you don't try to argue with the thought. So if you were to do that in this hand, that would look something like, rephrasing danger and taking the thought that, losing a whole stack or bluffing a whole stack is dangerous, try to transform that into something and realize, it's okay, it's part of poker, and it's not something you should shy away from. But on the other hand, what you can do is work with the fear. And I think a very common misconception poker players have is that they shouldn't feel emotion, they shouldn't be afraid to do something, they shouldn't feel anger. When in reality, I don't think that's true. I think we all tilt at some level. I think we all feel some kind of frustration or fear or stuff like that. But the difference is we don't really let it control our decisions. So what you can do is explore that fear, again, be a bit curious about it. So be like, okay, I feel a bit anxious here. I feel afraid to get my stack in. And by the way, research says that only doing that and labeling the emotion that you're feeling already creates a lot of distance between you and the emotion and your reaction to it. So even though you feel the fear, you allow yourself to react differently to it. So that would be like, okay, I feel fear here, but I'm not gonna let fear drive my decision. I'm gonna let fear exist within me, and I'm still gonna make the highest EV decision anyway, despite the fear being there. And I know this can sound quite simple, and yes, it takes some practice, but it's definitely something you can get, an outcome you can get to if you allow yourself to feel this uncomfortable emotion and explore them instead of trying to make them go away as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and again, the way I feel like a lot of poker players really try to suppress this sort of emotions and maybe cover it with obsessively studying some spot or obsessively drilling, but sometimes the problem doesn't rely on your understanding of the spot. Again, you might understand the spot well, but it might be just something that hurts your execution and you're not working on that level. Like it's a lot of players just prioritize strategy, technical aspects, but then they feel they have a gap. Even again, maybe the best example for this is the 7-6 and when the student says, "I know it's a call," but he struggles to do that, and for that I think it's important, as Alex said, to try to go on a deeper level. And
and that's a good point. And I think something worth mentioning is that the reason why mental leaks can be much more difficult to solve is that you can't really see them in Hold the Manager or Hand to Note or whatever. You know, if you have a technical leak and you have a big enough database, you're gonna see, you know, your CBAT stat is too low or you fold reverse too much or whatever. But with mindset leaks, it actually takes active work, first of all, to identify them. And then even when you do identify them, the reason why they're leaks is there's usually resistance to seeing them. And it really takes an honest look to see, okay, well, I'm leaking here mentally. And it's hard to take that honest look because usually these leaks are protected by a lot of resistance and ego and so on and so forth. So they can be a bit harder to catch.
And we have finally the last hand of the video, and this time it's a hand where I am under the investigation. So here I think I had lost a pot just before, so I didn't manage to rebuy in time because on this platform auto rebuy doesn't work very well. So you can see that I'm a bit short. We have a tight regular that opens from cutoff, and here I already make the first mistake because I default for my usual 3-bet size instead of sizing down according to my stack. But what happens is that, okay, we get a very good board. I go for a range bet small. And now on the turn, I already start to feel a bit frisky because I created already a very short SPR. So, I went for a half pot bet, but I realized that I had only 30 blinds left and I didn't consider this before betting. So I didn't consider perhaps that I could also consider checking this hand with this stack depth, because here it's very unpleasant if cutoff decides to shove. So basically, I realized at this moment when I saw a bit less than 30 big blind, what am I doing? And I sort of started to focus on my mistake already within the end itself. My opponent calls and I get a queen of clubs. And here I remember thinking something like, my hand definitely doesn't look like a great check call. It doesn't look like a great bluff. But what if I check and my opponent turns a jack into a bluff, trying to fold out a queen? My opponent maybe, I even completely forgot that he's supposed to have aces because we are short. Because again, in my head, we were not short when the end started. And I thought, well, sometimes he will fast play value on the turn. What if he also has ace queen? I will shove trying to fold out ace queen. I mean, anyway, I was like, it cannot be a huge punt. It's not much left. And I sort of wanted to ditch any responsibility here. And I just defaulted to the aggressive play, which can be, some kind of, usually players either default to passive or aggressive lines archetypically. And so I went for this bet, and my opponent calls with king queen, and I guess is pretty happy about my gift here. So
I guess so.
What are your thoughts here?
So I think there's multiple things to think about, because what I really don't want to do on this video or any other video is to pathologize every mistake or every loss of focus, because if we're realistic about it, especially if you play online, if you play higher and maybe you can't take a break whenever you want, especially if you play on a site like, I don't know what this site is, but for me 888 does this.
Yeah, that's the one.
it
That's the
does
one.
a lot of really tilting stuff, and it's very difficult to keep fully focused there because it has so many bugs. So what I'm trying to say is that these hands, like these small mistakes of like losing focus and making some kind of, weird play because you just realize you're not full stacked. I mean, it will happen. And especially if that it's not a common thing that happens, very often. I don't think we should be like, I have to work on that because I slightly lost focus there and I didn't see one thing. No, I think what's more to discuss there is what happens after that hand, or how you treat yourself within that hand. Like, are you able to, do you have an inner nurturing voice that can say, okay, it's a mistake, it happened, it's justified, it will happen from time to time. It doesn't say anything about me as a player and it's fine, let's move on. And then if you do have that inner voice, you're probably going to be able to perform and really let that hand in the past. On the other hand, which is way more common with poker players, is that they develop this very harsh, critical inner voice. And they're like, you idiot, why did you get here with why are you half the stack? Why you don't see what you're doing? And what that does is it only creates, more stress and more anger, and generally it's gonna lead to more mistakes. I know a lot of people think that voice helps them and moves them forward in a way, but if you look at the science, if you look at the research, everyone kind of shows that that's not true, and that kind of voice is only doing, bad things for you, and it's gonna have bad consequences. And in coaching, in therapy, even if you're doing therapy, one important goal is to develop that inner nurturing voice that can say, it's okay to make a mistake from time to time. So what about you? What was your reaction to this hand, emotionally?
Yeah, basically I was really annoyed at myself. Again, usually it happens after, usually I realize I make a mistake after the hand, but here I didn't manage to quote unquote switch gears within the end. While lately I'm more able to recognize that I made a mistake. Here I guess maybe I was still, I don't remember because it's been some time when I played this hand. Maybe I was slightly tense because of a previous hand where I lost the pot because I couldn't manage to rebuy. But I mean, I don't. It was I guess some standard hand, but still I didn't have time to probably to process that. And I'm able to do what you said, but for me it works after detaching a little bit. So I need to take some minutes off. In fact, as soon as I play this hand, I'm like, no, this I recognize immediately, and I put sit out, and I go to do something else. But my problem then is that once I do that, I detach emotionally. I can process the mistake, but then I lose focus, and I'm not able to let's say I'm not able to do okay, I'll go for a walk 5-10 minutes, then I'll sit again. It's more likely I would do something else non-poker related after. So I have this I mean, I can deal with that after, but it sort of has an impact on the length of the session, because again, I don't want to keep playing a session without processing this, because I know that it will lead just to this some feelings of anger to increase, and because I would still think about the hand until I close the loop. So do you have any sort of advice for I'm pretty sure it's a problem that also other players will have, that either they keep playing and they don't process the thing, or they detach, they manage to process this, but then they lose sort of focus for the activity and move on with the day. For me it was, I went to study, let's say, so it was still poker, but not playing. I deliberately wanted to avoid potential situations which might increase tension, or might me re-evoke some of this where this harsh version of myself, the overly self-critical version of myself, might arise again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's multiple things to say about that, because the way you approached it, I feel like it's the functional way to approach it, because especially if you, let's say you hear yourself being critical and maybe a bit angry, or you feel like, okay, I'm not in my best focus now, maybe I didn't sleep well, or whatever is going on in my life, the best decision would be, okay, I'm gonna step away from the tables right now, but I'm still gonna do something that's related to my values and my goals, which, like you said, for you it was studying. So I don't think there's necessarily something wrong with that, and I think it's but I do think it's a fine line between when you do that, because I think there are players, and I used to be one of them, which, like, I do a small mistake where I feel slightly defocused and I realized, I don't know, I had a hand where I didn't really fully think about his range. I'm like, okay, I'm not playing well enough, let's quit for the day. And then at the end of the month, my volume would be like half of what I intended it to be. So I think that would be a protection mechanism that, to me, it was like, I always have to play perfectly, and whatever mistake I do, it means I should get away from there. So for me, that's obviously a protection mechanism that is like, no, don't do any mistake. And if you're in danger of doing a mistake, you'd rather not be here. So for me, would be, okay, I'm going to make some mistakes. I need to be more acceptant of it. So what I'm trying to say here is it really depends how often you do that, and if you feel like it's really counterproductive to you. Just quitting sessions and taking breaks and stuff. And if you feel like it's too much, I think what you can do is, again, the most useful thing is being able to stay with that emotion and practicing. Even if I feel frustrated, even if I feel anger, I'm still capable of doing the highest TV decision and practicing that. And also, it's like catching these shifts that happen during the hands when you kind of the rational side of you loses control and you go into like a childish or a parental side of yourself that kind of took control. There's usually gonna be hints to that, because our inner dialogue changes its tone, and like you said, it's gonna be something like, oh, whatever, just do that. And it's very different from the rational side of you. Or you're gonna hear these terms that kind of limit your range of decisions that you can take. For example, like, he always has it, or like, he never has it, or stuff like, as I said, whatever. Or even saying like, I can't, like, for you probably in this hand, it's like, I can't fold, like, I can't just check fold. Well, in reality, you can check fold.
That's
like,
the best play, actually.
Yeah, but even if it's not, like, even if you are in a spot where you cannot fold because it would be an incorrect fold, it's better to say that, like, it would not be correct to fold here because I can't fold. Your mind already processes, like, there is no fold button that I can click, which is not true. Like, you can always fold. Maybe it's not correct, but already your mind kind of processes those a different way and allows you to choose from different options and go deeper with your thought process than just being like, I can't fold, I have to call, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's exactly the shutdown that we were talking about before. Like, you completely remove your, before we were talking about considering ranges. In this case, I considered ranges, that's the fun part, but I completely shut down one part of the game tree, which was to fold. So yeah. It was like, I have to win this hand, basically. How do I win the hand? And, when you start to think that way, usually it doesn't end up, let's say it doesn't end up well. So
yeah, and what you said there, like, I have to win this hand, that's also a very common backstory that is very useful to identify when it runs, because you kind of go out of like, what's the best decision I can make here, with like, what are the ways I can take to win this hand? And already when you like recognize, oh, the story that I have to win this hand again, then you can go back to your rational and good thought process.
Mm-hmm. And before you mentioned to try to stay in and sort of endure the mistake, this approach I actually haven't used with usually some mistakes I can easily process. It's for me, it's more like if it's a mistake because I don't know something, I'm curious and I'm like, okay, I will mark this hand and I will review it after. I can totally live with that. But when it's something that I consider, again, this is a language of the self-critical person. Like, I consider this a stupid mistake when I'm still in the hand, but then that's why I need to detach. When I make a stupid mistake, I kind of struggle to let it go. And the approach that you were mentioning, actually, I vouch for it, especially if you feel yourself that you didn't sleep super well, and maybe you're looking like for an excuse not to play a session. And if you start, for example, to play when you're not at 100%, you still feel that our body, our mind can adapt. Of course, maybe if you are in that state, avoid reg battling, avoiding giving action 3-way to strong regs or heads up to strong regs. Maybe just try to play fewer tables,
Yeah, exactly.
You can adapt, but I'm interested to hear how you, with energy management, for me, it's, let's say, it's easier from a rational perspective to have this approach. But with mistake, which, I don't want to use improperly the term obsessive in this case, but mistakes can sort of be an obsessive thought for a short term. So what advice would you give for how to handle this kind of obsessive thoughts about making a mistake in the hand? Like, one way maybe to besides saying I know that I can make mistakes, but what would be your let's say emergency fix, and how do you reframe it to go to endure? Let's endure and try to see if we can go back to our A game or to our rational self within the session, let's say.
So I wouldn't advise you just stay in and continue playing, but what I would say is that you should make a goal of practicing to get there. So if right now you're making a mistake and you feel like you're spiraling on it and feeling very angry, I definitely wouldn't advise to stay at the tables. What I would advise to do is that you take a break and you try to actually go deeper into that hand. So not the technical side. What was your thought process? And very often you're gonna notice that you think that mistake says something about you, like you're an idiot, you don't know how to play poker, stuff like that, and you note it down. Feel like, okay, this is what my thought process was when I realized I made the mistake, and what was the emotion that came up, because sometimes it can be like frustration, it can be anger towards yourself, no doubt that emotion. And I think a good exercise to do is to ask yourself, okay, what would I tell my best friend if he made that mistake? Or like, what would I tell my best friend? Because most likely you wouldn't tell him, you're a fucking idiot,
yeah.
And note that down. And again, like, keep doing that because once you are able to rephrase that thought process and stop telling yourself, you're an idiot for making that mistake, then the anger is also gonna release, and then you're gonna be able to take better decisions in game. But it is a process, so I'm not saying like, okay, just stay there after you make a mistake. I'm saying notice your tendency to leave and remove yourself from that situation, and work on improving it. And after some active work, then it will probably get better. And that's what we basically do in mindset coaching as well. There's no emergency or like quick fixes. Mindset is a process, and like especially these dysfunctional patterns, you probably have them since childhood and they've been developed around like your whole life. So saying that this is just a 5-minute tool that you can get rid of it would be just, bullshit. Like it's not gonna happen. It takes work. But I hope I gave some good guidelines on the areas that you can work on and how to start doing it, hopefully.
Yeah, it was actually a lot of very useful information and advice that can already be implemented. And hopefully also the viewers found benefit in this. By the way, this time we went for a longer format. I'm also curious in the feedback if you enjoy this more podcast style. It can be a format that can be part of the channel schedule, let's say. And thanks, Alex, for being there. By the way, if you want to contact Alex to ask her any question or to work with her, I will post her contacts in the video description and in the pinned comment. So feel free to reach out to her. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, leave a like, and join also our Discord channel where we discuss technical aspects and general aspects of poker.
Yeah, thanks, Francesco. It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed doing this video. I hope the viewers also enjoy seeing them. And if you have any questions or want any insights on mindset, you can always leave a comment on this video or check my socials. And yeah, hopefully we'll be in touch.